Joanne Kathleen Rowling has turned Harry Potter into a symbol of hate, a constant reminder to trans people, intersex people, Jewish people, women of colour, butch lesbians, and even survivors of breast cancer that they're not safe in any space which advertises, sells, or otherwise promotes said brand. She has directly funneled money from said IP into anti-trans campaigns, including the very one which denied trans people within the UK legal recognition and protections in line with their gender this year, and has since pledged her effectively infinite resources to footing the bill for anti-trans bigots to be allowed to target, abuse, and openly discriminate against trans people. There's no barrier between the author's bigotry and her work when the latter is funding the former, a fact that needs to be made clear. But first, a quick content warning for the following: transmisia, intermisia, anti-Semitism, white supremacy, and misogyny. If our work has helped you, please consider supporting us via Patreon so we can keep the channel running. You can also help us by liking, commenting, and sharing our work on social media. I'd also just like to take the time to remind our viewers that the statements made throughout our videos are the opinions of myself, the host, based on the evidence I have available to me. They are not and should not be taken as unquestionable fact, which is why we reference everything, because we're valuable. Thus we strive to give you, the viewer, the ability to check all evidence for yourself in order to make up your own mind, which is what the reference numbers in the top left corner are for, being numbers that match up with the reference list found in the transcript linked down below. As such, we encourage all viewers to do their own research to reach an informed conclusion about the topic. Hi there, my name is Ethel Thurston, she, her, they, them, and we need to talk about Harry Potter in its modern context, namely how Joanne Kathleen Rowling has completely destroyed any and all possibility for said IP to be anything other than a symbol of hate. I know I'm late to the party on this topic. I myself feel that this ship sailed much earlier, but said hate has since become undeniable by any reasonable standard, even for people outside human rights circles. It is my solid opinion that if you continue to glorify, promote, or worse, pay for Harry Potter or the wider Wizarding World brand in any way, that is you personally signing your name in support of anti-trans violence, specifically abuse of our members, the removal of our rights, and our exclusion from public life altogether. We're not quite at the point of extermination camps, thankfully, but we're getting there. And that's in large part thanks to Rowling and how she spends all the money and influence she makes from Harry Potter. Though, again, this isn't anything new. Myself and countless other trans people have been pointing out Rowling's support for violent bigotry for years now, including the anti-Semitic conspiracy that Jewish billionaires are secretly indoctrinating young white girls into thinking that they're trans boys or men as part of an effort to sterilize them, reducing white fertility, bringing about the Great Replacement, which is a literal neo-Nazi conspiracy. One of the earliest proponents of this narrative was a vile bigot by the name of Magdalene Burns, whom Rowling first openly glorified in her 2020 letter attacking the trans community. Yet, far from distancing herself from Burns when myself and others pointed out her blatant anti-Semitism, Rowling decided to go on record glorifying said vicious bigot once again in 2025, a whole 5 years later, as evidenced in our video, J.K. Rowling refuses to stop glorifying rabid anti-Semite. Another person to promote this narrative was Helen Joyce, who, in her book, Trans When Ideology Meets Reality, lists 3 names whom she believes are part of a quote-unquote global agenda, responsible for the aforementioned indoctrination and sterilization of young white girls, namely Joe Soros, John Stryker, and Jennifer Pritzker, all 3 of whom are Jewish. This is modern-day blood libel. Joyce is also a close and personal friend of J.K. Rowling, with Rowling not only posing for photographs with the anti-Semitic author, but going so far as to label her Rowling's quote-unquote battle buddy, notably after the publishing of the book just quoted and the subsequent pushback on its anti-Semitic narratives. That's how supportive of Joyce's work Rowling is. So this wasn't a once-off mistake. Rowling genuinely feels kinship with multiple people who have argued that trans people are a Jewish conspiracy intent on destroying white Western civilization. Speaking of, Rowling also went on record putting her full support behind someone who declared trans people a quote, civilization-ending concept, end quote, by which I mean Rowling personally replied to the specific post using that phrase, declaring said bigot to be a quote-unquote heroine, going so far as to even add a little kiss at the end to show just how much she loved said statement. A statement which, it must be said, is nothing short of genocidal rhetoric. As discussed by us at the time, if trans people are a civilization-ending concept, how then does one set about saving civilization? It should therefore come as no surprise that Rowling played a prominent part in our video exposing the fascism of gender-critical feminism, which shows how gender-critical fascists have appropriated the word feminism to hide their fascism. Said video is fully referenced, as always. But all this might have you wondering, what on earth does this have to do with Harry Potter? I mean, sure, Rowling is a vile bigot, but how can I say that putting money in her pocket or even just promoting her work is directly enabling or encouraging said behavior? Well, because Rowling has told us such herself, with her asserting that 90% of her fanbase agrees with her anti-trans views as far back as 2020. In doing so, she invoked everyone who is a fan of her work and keeps it in the cultural zeitgeist as part of a silent majority intended to help normalize her anti-trans bigotry. Then there's the money, with Rowling having personally donated more than £70,000 of her Harry Potter royalties to the gender-critical group directly responsible for the Supreme Court ruling that excluded trans people from the legal definition of their gender, stripping them of rights they've enjoyed without incident since 2010. This unleashed a wave of gender-critical violence, with gender-critical fascists terrorizing not just trans people, but also intersex people, women of colour, and even survivors of breast cancer, as we covered the other week. This is violence trans people have warned about for nearly a decade, as seen in this 2016 article written after the US passed similar rollbacks on the rights of trans people. How did Rowling respond to said violence being supercharged in the UK? By tweeting out that, quote, "I love it when a plan comes together," end quote, whilst posing with a fucking cigar. That's how fucking spiteful she is, that she paid money to throw cis women, including literal survivors of breast cancer, to the walls of patriarchy, with said women having their womanhood policed by gender-critical fascists. And that money came directly from the Harry Potter fanbase, particularly everyone who bought the Harry Potter game after they were told not to. This blood is as much on their hands as it is hers. That is what you are supporting if you continue to give her brand money or breath. Groups of violent bigots with a history of ritualistically terrorizing survivors of breast cancer. And it's not just them. As seen in Rowling's attacks on Imane Halef last summer, declaring any woman or girl of colour that fails to meet her white supremacist standards of femininity fair game for public violence. All because of an unsubstantiated rumour that Imane might be intersex, something which, to be clear, still wouldn't justify said abuse. Yet how many girls of colour had their passion for sports killed upon the altar to this putrid fascist. How many saw the abuse Imane was made to suffer and decided that they were too manly, or that it's just not worth the violence, when that's how you're rewarded for training to be the best of the best? Of course, the main targets here are trans, and due to deliberate conflation, intersex people, particularly trans and intersex women, when it comes to access to gendered spaces. The goal here is to make us so afraid to go out and use essential utilities in line with our gender, such as bathrooms, that we're forced back into the closet. That is their goal here. The forced detransition of every single trans person through the threat of societal violence. Because, lesson fun fact, that is the number one reason for detransitioning, to escape violence and abuse. We saw this in the US Trans Survey released on the 11th of June, the largest survey of trans Americans' health to date, which found that out of the 9% of all people who had detransitioned, only 4% of them, roughly 0.36% of all people who had ever transitioned, did so because they realized they weren't the gender they thought they were. Meanwhile, the vast majority did so because it was, quote, just too hard to be transgender in their community, end quote. That is what Rowling and her gender-critical movement is trying to create here in the UK. That is what you are supporting if you continue to engage with Harry Potter or the larger wizarding world in any meaningful way. I don't give a personal shit if you watch physical copies of the movies in the privacy of your own home, but when you stream the show, post fan art, buy the latest Lego set, or go to that theme park, you are declaring your support for Rowling's banner in her anti-trans crusade. You are telling every trans person, intersex person, Jewish person, woman of color, and survivor of breast cancer that you are dangerous, that your nostalgia matters more to you than our literal fucking safety. Yet it gets worse. Which finally brings us to Rowling's recent announcement, namely her legal fighting fund for gender-critical fascists. Reading out the announcement itself, it stated that, quote, the J.K. Rowling's Woman Fund, JKRWF, offers legal funding support to individuals and organizations fighting to retain women's sex-based rights in the workplace, in public life, and in protected female spaces. It provides women with the means and confidence to bring to justice cases that make legal precedents, force policy change, and make positive contributions to women's lives in the future. What we fund. We fund legal representation for women and organizations who have lost their livelihoods or are facing tribunals because of their expressed beliefs, are being forced to comply with unreasonable inclusion policies regarding single-sex spaces and services or female-only clubs and events, are challenging legislation which takes away the freedoms or protections women are entitled to, don't have adequate means to bring actions to court to defend themselves. The JKRWF does not hire a lawyer on your behalf, so you must already have sought legal representation and have a clear desired outcome to your case. How to apply? If this sounds like you, fill out one of the eligibility checklists below. There's one for individuals and one for organizations. If the answer to any of the questions is no, then the fund is not for you. If it's a yes to all of them, you can proceed to the online application form. After initial screening, applications go through a rigorous assessment by the JKRWF board. Awards are at the discretion of the board and limited to closely defined legal actions with a clear goal and time span. Please note the JKRWF is a private fund, not a charity or a trust, and does not accept donations." End quote. Again, I must reiterate, trans people, including trans women, had legally enshrined access to women's spaces since 2010 without incident. That's 15 whole years. Furthermore, we have actual peer-reviewed science that demonstrates that trans-inclusive spaces, such as bathrooms and changing rooms, are no more dangerous than those which exclude trans people. Said study found that trans-inclusive policies, quote, "are not related to the number or frequency of criminal incidents in these spaces," end quote, with said research concluding that, quote, "this study provides evidence that the fears of increased safety and privacy violations as a result of non-discrimination laws are not empirically grounded," end quote. Because no shit, a rapist doesn't give two craps about what's legal and what isn't, they're a rapist. Bathrooms are not dwarven doors protected by magic runes. A shitty bit of plastic saying men or women won't do anything to stop a predator. Yet Rowling would have you believe that a cis man would go through the process of social and even medically transitioning in order to gain access to said women, when it'd be much easier to buy a fucking janitor uniform. This absurdity is no more than a lie intended to demonize trans women as an intrinsic threat, when the evidence shows us the exact opposite. Cis women and girls are much safer around trans women than gender-critical fascists, a fact shown in our video, Anti-Trans Leader Convicted of Child Abuse. Not only do we talk about the facts that the titular leader, Nicola Murray, a key gender-critical voice in the Supreme Court ruling, had been convicted of more than a decade of child sexual abuse in a trial that was ongoing while she testified at the Supreme Court, but how many gender-critical leaders, including both Joyce and Rowling, have a history of glorifying child predation. To be clear on Rowling's part in all this, she praised Lolita, a story in which a 38-year-old man kidnaps and rapes a 12-year-old girl, as a, quote, "great and tragic love story," end quote. Do check out the video for further details. But returning to the fund, it's worth pointing out the fact that Rowling could have done this at any point for real issues faced by women in the UK, such as discrimination against pregnant people. We had a very high-profile case of this a few years ago regarding Antonia Kinlay, an actor who was recast between seasons of an ongoing series due to becoming pregnant. She had to fight the production company on grounds of discrimination relating to pregnancy and won in 2021, with the courts ruling that the production company had unfairly dismissed her and that there were other avenues they could have taken to accommodate her. She was awarded an £11,000 payout, an absolute slap on the wrist in my eyes. Yet, as far as I'm aware, Rowling never commented in support of Antonia or stepped in to help her financially. Now, why do I bring this up? Well, aside from the fact that employment discrimination against pregnant people, including the women Rowling pretends to care about, is still a major problem in the UK, to the point that a major production company thought they could get away with it in such a high-profile case, the series Antonia was acting in was the TV adaptation of J.K. Rowling's Cormoran Strike novels. So, to be absolutely clear, Rowling did nothing as the production company behind her series discriminated against a cis woman for becoming pregnant between seasons, yet she's up and ready to help anti-trans bigots defend their discriminatory actions. If I had Rowling's money yet could only pick one case to work on, I know which case I would choose. The one that fights against discrimination. This isn't the only time we've seen her fail to protect cis women, as seen in the fact that she spent an entire summer harassing a cis woman of colour, Imane Halef, because she thought Imane was trans or intersex. Why? Well, there was no reason other than Rowling's horrific racism and misogyny. Imane didn't meet Rowling's white patriarchal standards of femininity, thus Rowling set about targeting her, a story we've seen again and again. Rowling presented Imane as a threat to the other cis women competing, in spite of Rowling having no evidence for any of her accusations about Imane being trans or intersex, let alone that trans or intersex people present a greater danger to cis women in sports. Yet that's the narrative she chose to spend an entire summer presenting, one that's routinely used to terrorize all women of colour, whether they're cis or trans, endosex or intersex. Rowling said absolutely nothing, however, about Steven van der Velde being allowed to compete at those very same Olympics. Steven van der Velde is a Dutch volleyball player who was convicted of flying to Britain to rape a 12-year-old girl. Again, Rowling has zero evidence that Imane was trans or intersex, and yet spent months attacking her on the basis of Rowling's racist misogyny, yet said absolutely nothing about the convicted child rapist. The trans community found time to talk about both, to defend Imane from Rowling's patriarchal white supremacy, whilst also dragging the IOC and Dutch government for permitting a child rapist to play. But Rowling, with her near infinite resources, decided that being a racist misogynist policing the bodies of women and girls of colour was more important than the literal child rapist in the room. Even if Rowling only had the time to talk about one, I know which one I, as a trans person, would choose to focus on. The fucking child rapist, obviously. Point is, this fund has nothing to do with protecting cis women. It is purely intended as a means to terrorize all trans people. This is Rowling pledging all the money she's made and is still making from Harry Potter and the Wizarding World to efforts clearly designed to empower discrimination and other violence against the trans community. That fact is inescapable. This joins the mountain of stuff discussed in the previous chapter, which you are supporting if you continue to engage with Harry Potter or the Wizarding World in any meaningful way. And that goes for everyone, especially those working on said projects such as John Lithgow, Nick Frost, Tom Felton, and yes, even Papa Essayadu, who have defended their part in future Harry Potter productions. The only exception to this rule is, of course, the children who have been tricked into this. They're not to blame for being made an accessory to Rowling's hate campaign. Their parents or guardians, however, that's a different story. If this project even survives a few years, I wouldn't be surprised if the production company is forced to recast multiple children, including the main three, as said children become teenagers and are made aware of what they were signed up for. Not all of them would, but I can imagine a few will grow up with a basic sense of humanity. I just feel sorry for said children who have been failed by every guardian involved in being pushed to become a part of Rowling's hateful legacy. No child deserves to suffer that association. Again, they've been completely failed by every guardian and safeguarding process. Yet, as far as I'm concerned, all the adult actors working on Harry Potter or Wizarding World productions are walking around with Nazi armbands. That is what they have chosen to make themselves a part of, a project seeking the total eradication of trans people, reliant on anti-Semitism and general white supremacy, no matter how much they protest the association or sign letters condemning Rowling. When she has pledged the money you're helping bring in to legally terrorizing trans people, you don't get to claim that you're not the one pushing the button. They are awfully culpable, and I hope this is the end of many careers. Though, what do you think? What are your thoughts on the fund? What would you like to say to those who refuse to give up Harry Potter? What would you say to the actors who've chosen to make themselves a part of Rowling's violence? Did you notice something I missed? If so, be sure to let me know in the comments down below. And if you appreciate what we do here and want to help keep us running, please consider becoming one of the wonderful patrons who make our work possible. You can also make a one-time donation via PayPal or Super Thanks on YouTube. On that note, we'd just like to thank the following people: Matthew Kovac, Flynn, Bo Ayer, Deborah Goldsmith, Higgins the Seagull, Jackie Sins, Mix Alba, and Peter Cole. And from myself, Adita and Levi, take care now.